If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey Goal friends, it's me, Adrian, or Aiden. Either way, I am still your host and you are still listening to Susto, the podcast of ooky, spooky, scary stories. Welcome back. Thank you for showing up again. Thank you for tuning in again. And if this is your first time listening to Susto, welcome. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the Susto fam. You're one of my ghoul friends now. I hope you enjoy the show. You may have seen, I shared again on the social medias, I was awarded by Racket and Stir. They held a kind of like a contest where they had podcasts nominate themselves or submit themselves to win an assortment of different mini grants, I guess you could call them. And I was selected as one of the recipients. So I'm extremely grateful to everyone who sent in words of encouragement, and I'm super thankful to Racket and Stir. And yeah, it's just been a very exciting last couple of weeks. So yeah, I'm not going to take too much more of your time. I'm simply just going to say thank you for the 500th time, and it won't be the last. And we will go ahead and get into today's episode, which is the story of the Pishtaco. In Inca mythology, there is a deity, Viracocha, whose name can be translated as Sea of Fat. He is the creator of the earth and all its creatures, the maker of the sky and the sea and all the other gods. Among the Quechua people, he must be honored. In the Andean world, indeed, blood and fat are among the essential offerings to the sacred powers. The sacrifice of slaughtered animals and the offerings of their blood constitute the opening sequence of all religious ceremonies, writes French historian Nathan Wachtel in Gods and Vampires: Return to Chipaya. Animal fat, generally llama fat, is one of the basic ingredients in the composition of ritual tables. To the Quechua, fat is sacred and has also served medicinal purposes for centuries. It wasn't just in the Andes that fat had such uses. Far to the north, before they reached Inca lands, conquistadors used the fat of fallen Maya to dress their own wounds, as reported by one of those conquerors, Bernal Díaz del Castillo, in the Discovery and Conquest of Mexico, 1517 to 1521. It is easy to imagine the disgust and fear the surviving Maya must have felt upon seeing such a thing after a military defeat. It is believed similar battles during the later conquest of the Inca Empire inspired the legend of the Pishtaco, a fat-sucking monster known across various countries in South America. No stories of the Pishtaco exist from before the Spanish conquest. The name Pishtaco comes from the Quechuan word pishte, which means to behead, cut the throat, or cut into slices. While most Quechuan speakers are from Peru, over the years they have migrated into Bolivia, Ecuador, and other nearby mountainous regions, bringing the legend of Pishtaco with them. Pishtacos are often compared to vampires, but instead of sucking blood, they suck the fat from anyone careless enough to travel alone at night. In the Andes, it's thought that the vitality of the person is in the fat in their body, says John McDowell of Indiana University's Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology. People who are very bony and skinny, it's thought that they're wasting away and they don't have strong life force. So the Pishtaco, they come after this vital life force and deplete it. Over the past 500 years, there have been many descriptions of how a Pishtaco might appear. It is almost exclusively male, white-skinned, and only comes out at night. Not because he is unable to be in the light, but because his actions are best conducted under the veil of darkness. I think the Pishtaco expresses a kind of anxiety that the community has about outsiders, McDowell continues. After all, they've been through several hundred years of outsiders coming in and pushing them around, so Lord knows they probably have their reasons to be a little worried about outsiders. And the Pishtaco, not unlike a conquistador, does not work alone. He is aided and accompanied by humans who help him capture, transport, and slaughter his victims, and then extract their fat. In fact, if there were no helpers of the Pishtaco, perhaps there would be no tales of the Pishtaco. The earliest stories come from local men who helped them in their grim task. Spanish priest Cristobal de Molina was the first person known to have been accused of being a Pishtaco in 1571. The locals of Cusco refused to bring him firewood as they feared being killed for their fat, which they believed the priests used to grease the bells they rang in the day. The 19th century brought tales of rich merchants and miners who were thought to be Pishtacos. As the legend goes, they used the locals to make soap, medicine, and even grease for the machinery in their factories. With modernity and the economic collapse of the region that came with it, it came to be documentarians, government officials, and doctors who were suspected of these practices. White doctors, for example, would arrive in marginalized communities with nurses who were known as mestizos, that is, local people who were urbanized, spoke fluent Spanish, and may have been of both European and indigenous descent. These doctors would search for children, legend had it, to take their kidneys and eyes. Though their targets were different, the framework was the same. People were powerless to stop the use of their own bodies by someone who is protected by authority. These stories have continued, with rendered human fat or sometimes other harvested parts as a constant, though they have evolved and moved out of the realm of the supernatural and into the real world. In a paper in the journal Amerindia, written in Quechua and Spanish, Hernán Aguilar of the Latin American Institute of the Free University of Berlin documents modern first-hand accounts of Pishtacos from their helpers, all of whom report that they were offered money to find victims. They described seeing rural people having their throats cut with a sickle-shaped knife before being brought to the Pishtaco's home and hung upside down by their feet in a room of candles, their rendered fat dripping into bowls below them. While they all expressed horror at what they saw, many couldn't afford to turn the money down. According to Pishtacos, Human Fat Murderers, Structural Inequalities and Resistances in Peru by Ernesto Vázquez del Águila, the most advanced Pishtacos are able to take their victims' fat in a far stealthier way. Some Pishtacos, it is believed, do not kill their victims instantly, but they survive for a short period of time and then die, he writes. These Pishtacos steal the fat with great mastery using syringes so that their work is unnoticeable. Their victims awaken without any symptoms or pain, but they get sick, become gradually weaker, and after a few days, they die without knowing the causes of their deaths. In one of the more recent visible documented stories of the Pishtaco, in 2009, a group of men captured dozens of locals in the highland jungle region of Huánuco, more than 160 miles from the Peruvian capital of Lima. They used candles to render their fat, which was collected in old soda bottles and sold for use in rituals. This practice continued for years before 3 of them were captured and confessed. They led authorities to the remains of at least 60 adults, the story went national, then global. Many of those from the mountains made it clear they believed the men to be Pishtacos. This should open the eyes of those Peruvians who live in the cities and ignore what happens in the provinces, wrote one commenter on a news article about the killings. This case is just one of thousands that demonstrates that these stories are real, that they are not rumors. What connects conquistadors, missionaries, well-meaning doctors, and cold-blooded killers is what makes the Pishtaco legends most frightening of all. They are not supernatural, but human. Okay, so I do want to start off right away and clarify that apparently the last part of that story where we're talking about the group of men that had captured dozens of locals and they took the authorities to the remains, and so that came out in the news article, and that article was actually tagged or linked into this story. And also the story that I read, it's from Atlas Obscura. And again, all of these links are going to be in the Susto Google Doc. So if you're a patron, check that out, patreon.com/Susto podcast. But yeah, that link, I went to it earlier because I wanted to read it. This link kind of corroborates it. It's from elmundo.es. Apparently in a bunch of the other links that I was using to research this, it turned out that this group of men that were kidnapping people, it's human trafficking, to use their bodies in like a different way. I don't know. Apparently it wasn't real. It was a hoax. And there was one comment on this site, the El Mundo site. This person said that case is an urban legend. There was news about it lately, and in the end, it turned out to be a political smokescreen. Like I said, the other articles that I looked into, it did seem like they all alluded to the fact that didn't actually happen, that group of men. What I will say though is this is another one of those stories that I think is more rooted in reality than some people might think. There's this, not even a response, but it's like I guess it was a way for the indigenous communities to, I guess, warn each other of these colonizers that were coming into their communities, conquering the land, trying to convert them, to their religion and their practices, trying to bring them quote unquote civilization. Like, it's the typical colonization starter pack, and in the process, people are killed, murdered, as was said in the link that I read in Atlas Obscura. Spaniards were using conquered Mayans. They were using their fat to heal wounds, which was, again, that was a practice that was practiced, I think, into the early 19th century, and then it stopped because people realized that didn't really work, but they had other uses for the fat. Yeah, it's like you have to think, if you're in a community that's being targeted by this one group, it's natural, I think, to come up with some sort of story to warn other people. It's like a dog whistle. You need to watch out for these kinds of people. And the Pishtaco, it's this kind of vampire-y creature, but it's very clearly described as a white person. And they say that they're usually hairy and bearded. And I think a lot of the time when we see depictions of conquistadores, they're in their night outfits, their armor. There you go. They have beards and stuff. Other descriptions of them from this one website that I'm looking at, it says the Pishtacos themselves are described as wearing boots, a hat, leather jackets, that they may be in horseback. And then as times have progressed, they're saying also that they may be in a car. So they might look like a priest, they might look like a doctor, they might have a long knife, but that at the end of the day, that the Pishtacos attack solitary travelers, and they dismember them for cannibalistic purposes, for what's the word, utilitarian purposes, I guess. They're using the fat for machinery as well. People who commit these kinds of acts, colonizers, they were straight up monsters, and it's something that we see in pretty much every first contact of different indigenous communities, especially in history. I will say this: colonization is still happening. There are still people who try to go to different places, to different lands, to make contact with indigenous communities, to convert them to believing whatever this missionary believes, sometimes it ends up in missionaries being killed. Like, maybe I'll do an episode about that, because there's very well documented occurrences of missionaries going, and trying to do this and then ending up dead because they wanted to make first contact and convert these people, and it just didn't work out the way they thought it would. But in other cases, like with the Spaniards, we know that Spaniards were very successful in colonizing a bunch of different places and doing it in a very horrific way. And so, it's like, it makes sense that these communities created this monster out of this person, even though it's like it's not a long stretch. It's like the Pishtaco is just, it seems like Pishtaco is more a type of person than like oh, it's this cryptid monster. Although, of course, as these stories get retold and retold, it's like the telephone game, and we see it with a lot of these stories, is that the story gets told and then it starts off as a person, but it ends up being this horrible creature, blood-sucking vampire, whatever. I'm going to read through some other links. I'm going to go through this one. It says, another possible theory in regions where a Pishtaco attack is a wasting illness is that Pishtacoism explains death from diseases like typhoid, much as vampirism explained death from tuberculosis in 19th century New England. The connection to gringos could come historically from diseases such as smallpox, which the Spanish introduced on arriving in South America. So again, it could be this idea of, in other stories, when people are attacked by vampires, they end up dying because of the attack. And so this is just like a different version of that, with a different name, because again, these colonizers they came over to these lands, and then they brought disease with them that these indigenous or native people that were never exposed to before. And then after being exposed, of course, they have no immunity to it, so they end up dying. And this continues. Whatever its origins, the legend persists. In 1987, the rumor swept through Peru's Ayacucho region that the president had dispatched 5,000 Pishtacos to the region to pay off Peru's foreign debt with human fat. In 2009, the director of Peru's Criminal Investigations Unit, General Eusebio Felix Murga, claimed that a Pishtaco gang had murdered at least 60 victims in Huánuco. This is the story that I was talking about. It says, according to Murga, the gang sold the fat at $15,000 per liter through intermediaries to European cosmetic companies. That is a very interesting, conspiracy theory. This claim was quickly debunked. For one thing, the authorities in Huánuco knew nothing about the supposed rash of murders, but that a prominent government official would even float such a claim speaks to the currency of the belief, at least in some regions. Okay, so just a recap of that. There was this rumor that the president had dispatched 5,000 Pishtacos to essentially human traffic for human fat. And in 2009, which is a long time after, but I'm sure the story just kept going strong, the director of Peru's Criminal Investigations Unit, all of Peru, Criminal Investigations Unit director, even fell for it. Thankfully, it was debunked. But someone at that high of an official real-world authority fell for these rumors and these stories. But again, I think it's very closely based in reality, because we mentioned about colonization happening. It's this story, as many of these, they come from these traumatic events. There's a lot, we talk about trauma a lot on this show. I'm going to need to have a therapist or someone on this show that can help me break that down. I think that'd be really interesting. This is what I was saying earlier, that Pishtaco it's more of a type of a person than a creature. It's based on what you do as a person. Someone could consider me a Pishtaco based on what I do. And I think this will clear it up. This part says, because Pishtacos are mostly gringo or mestizo, some scholars believe the Pishtaco personifies the exploitation of indigenous Andeans by outside, quote-unquote, white forces, the wealthy foreigners, even their own government. However, not all accused Pishtacos are white. Even indigenous Andeans whose behavior, personality, or habits fall too far from the norm can be suspect. I will say, I don't know if it's, obviously this researching this episode is the first time introduced to this idea. From reading what I've read, again, it's probably not enough. I feel like it's not that this person, if it's an indigenous person, an indigenous Andean, is being accused of being a Pishtaco, I don't know that it's that they're falling too far from the norm, or it's that they're falling too far from the norm in regards to how they protect their community. It's like I feel like the Pishtaco, to like relate it to something I know, it's close to like La Malinche. Initially or originally, it's that it's a colonizer, a white colonizer. But even if you're also part of this indigenous community and you sell them out, then that could make you a Pishtaco. This continues. Nathan Wachtel recorded such an example in his book, Gods and Vampires. Hence, an alternative but related theory is that Pishtacos are not so much quote-unquote white as outsiders who stray from the norms of the rural community, no matter their ethnicity. So there you go. Basically, if you're coming to exploit this community, if you're coming to hurt them, especially in like a systemic way, then you would be, or you're contributing to that systemic hurt against them, then you would be considered a Pishtaco. Last, the link that I have here, it's an entry, it's a Wikipedia entry. It says, according to folklore, a Pishtaco is an evil monster-like man, often a stranger and often a white man who seeks out unsuspecting, the word they use here is Indians, to kill them and abuse them in many ways. The legend dates back to the Spanish conquest of South America. Primarily, his method of killing is stealing his victim's body fat for various cannibalistic purposes or cutting them up and selling their flesh as fried chicharrones. Wow, okay. It says Pishtaco derives from the local, like we said earlier, the Quechua word pishte, which means to behead, cut throat, slice. The preoccupation with body fat has a long tradition in the Andes region. Pre-Hispanic natives prized fat so much that a deity existed for it. It is also natural for the peasant rural poor to view fleshiness and excess body fat as the very sign of life, good health, strength, and beauty. Many illnesses are thought to have their roots in the loss of body fats, and skeletal thinness is abhorred. With this, the conquistadores' practice of treating their wounds with their enemies' corpse fats horrified the Indians. Spaniards are also said to have killed Indians and boiled their corpses to produce fat to grease their metal muskets and cannons, which rusted quickly in the humid Amazon. Andean Aboriginals feared Spanish missionaries as Pishtacos, believing the missionaries were killing people for fat, thereafter oiling church bells to make them especially sonorous. In modern times, similar beliefs held that sugar mill machinery needed human fat as a grease, or that jet aircraft engines could not start without a bit of human fat. So it's saying also that this fear was so deep that these communities, out of fear, they would reject assistance or aid from the U.S. Food and Peace Program, because they were like, no, well, these people are just trying to fatten us up so that then they can like harvest us, basically. And it sucks because I almost don't want to talk about it because I don't want to feed into it, but this is reminding me of, there was a conspiracy theory that came out in the last few years about how basically Hillary Clinton and Democrats were harvesting children. They were child trafficking so that they could take the blood and the white blood cells of the children and drink it. I forget, there was like a specific name for the blood that they were using, that they can drink it and it would provide them with health and life and this and that. And that theory, that it's a conspiracy theory, is completely based in like fiction. Also, there's a really good video. They usually do comedy. Brittany Broski and her cousin Sarah Shower. Brittany Broski is Kombucha Girl. She went viral a couple years ago. Anyway, they have a podcast and they did one about conspiracy theories, and they did a really good job explaining how conspiracy theories a lot of the time are rooted in white supremacy and anti-Semitism. I would highly suggest that you all check out that video, if not just for that section, because I think they did a great job breaking that down. The reason I'm like, I want to like bring it up, but I don't want to necessarily compare it to this, is because yes, these communities, it seemed like that is like a paranoid behavior, that they're refusing assistance because they're like, no, you just want to fatten us up so you can harvest us. Except it's rooted, again, just from the little bit that I did, and I could be spreading this information, so I encourage you all, never take anything what I say as the absolute truth. Please, please, please do your own research. Tell me if I'm wrong. I would please actually do that. But from what I've read, their paranoia, their fear is based in something that they saw actually happen, or that they knew to happen to other communities. And based on some of the classes that I took in getting my degree, I learned about the horrors of colonization, especially with like the Aztec nations, and how priests, actual priests, men who claimed to be servants of God, were treating Aztecs and the lengths that they went through to beat these people into submission and conversion to the Christian religion and to Catholicism. Just putting that out there. There's a very documented history for this fear of colonizers versus people saying that Hillary Clinton is drinking blood. I feel like this is a very dense subject, but that's what makes it so interesting. Okay, cool friends. Thank you so much as always for listening. Super appreciate it. One more time, if you are not following the socials, make sure that you do that. That's at Susto Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for any and all updates on the show. If you want to support the show, you can do so by leaving a review or a rating wherever you're listening. If you want to share your own story, video, recording, photo, whatever it is, and I'll share it on the show and on the socials. You can do that by DMing on the socials, in a review, or sending an email to sustopodcast@gmail.com. If you want to go the extra mile and support me, you can do so by becoming a patron on patreon.com/sustopodcast. Check it out for all the perks and the benefits. Speaking of, I do want to do my monthly shout out to all of my patrons for the month of April. Huge thank you to Cami, Julie, Lori, Karen, Julianne, Amanda, Angela and Co, Sam, Josette, Victoria, Dee, Eva, Mario, April, Spooky Lou, Rachel, Sadie, and Liza. Huge shout out, and don't talk to strangers. Bye.